folks, welcome back. It's John Pettipas. I got my fancy cowboy cap on today. There was some years ago now, last 10 years, there was a new Premier of Alberta. It was First Lady Premier I've ever had. And it was a item in the paper. They were showed cowboy boots, and a cap. And it said, boys, there's a new sheriff in town. And it was the first NDP Premier actually they had, Rachel Notley. She was the first NDP Premier of province of Alberta. I'm not a big fan of NDP, but nonetheless, she was a remarkable lady to get elected and so on. Speaking of remarkable lady, today I'm doing a tribute to a lady who was very much alive and well, and I'm doing it when she is alive and well because she, biological clock goes on. Women don't like their age told, but I'm certain Corrine now is in her early 90s, and she's a wonderful lady. She's a wonderful lady. Her maiden name was Bushy, and Corrine is the direct descendant of the founder of Hara Bushy. That's Hector Bushy. So she's a direct descendant. She's of Acadian stock, and like all Acadians, she's a wonderful lady and a wonderful cook. And that's how I first get to know, and this is the genesis of me doing this impromptu this afternoon. I was speaking to somebody this afternoon about making wreaths. See, I have a wreath ring, for a big wreath ring I put up front. And Mr. Charlie Whitey from Brooklyn, New York would come in. She was a restaurateur, and she's no longer in the restaurant business now. She's actually retired. And she lived in her own home until recently. She's moved to a assisted living facility in the last 6 months or so, I believe. And so anyway, they take quite an adjustment like that to be a remarkable lady, and I tip my hat to her when she's alive and well and with us. So get up there sometime and drop in and say hello to her. I'm certain she'd love to see visitors and friends and people. Very much a people lady, people person, people lady. Anyway, Mr. Whitey to come in. He was the guy that got the Christmas wreath business going in Nova Scotia. And she told me one time, you come in the restaurant, you have his entourage with him, his son and another fellow worked with him and his nephew and so on. So come in with his entourage. It was nice. You'd fill up a table. Mr. Whitey came in with his van from New York. And so she said she could always tell me he was out there because he'd order Hamburg steak with green peppers. They call that, I was been down to Brooklyn Terminal Market, New York, and Mr. Whitey got me from the local restaurant. It was a Hamburg steak with a pepper steak, called a pepper steak. It's like a steak or stew meat cut up in peppers in it. So I get Hamburg steak from her with mashed potatoes here, real mashed potatoes. And in fact, I have a pie plate here. I don't eat sweets. People give me sweets, I don't eat them. But they take in copious amounts, but I'm not a big guy of sugar. And she made homemade pies of various varieties at her home in East Harbour, where she'd bring them into a restaurant, cut them up pieces and serve them. So truck drivers, people motoring through, locals alike, got lovely homemade pie. And this bottle of pickles. The lady brings them in and says, made with love. Well, she made homemade pickles, and I'd order my Hamburg steak. It was real mashed potatoes and vegetable and a little thing of chow or something like that there. And it was homemade. She was a wonderful restaurant here. She ran for many years. She ran in the Fina restaurant in Auld, Cove. Later became Petro-Canada. She bought a property across the road. I'll bring in, now Corrine is very much with us, but I'll bring in her equally wonderful husband, her late husband. And she married well. He married well when he married Acadian stock from East Harbour Bushy. Terence is his name, late Terence Currie. And he was a Cape Bretoner. So when Terence moved across the causeway, he became a first-generation mainlander. And he worked for many years at the Esso Canada and helped Dartmouth Eastern Passage. The Esso refinery used to be there. And so as Esso man, when Esso shut their garage in Auld Cove, he bought the service station, and she did extensive renovations. Didn't seem to work out quite. She had wonderful service at both places, but it was at the lunch counter style format of the cross the road. She was right there, and see the customers on the meals took a little bit longer to get out in the Straight View restaurant, which I patronized for years. And it's now, if Terence and Corrine hadn't had the courage to buy that restaurant at a time of high interest, that building at a time of high interest rates and renovate. It's not easy to renovate a brick building, cement brick building, turn it into a restaurant. dozens of people. I don't know if dozens work there right now, but there's dozens of people working in Subway. In fact, there's other businesses in the complex, pieces added in the building since, but it was for Mrs. Currie, guts and courage, they wouldn't have employment. In fact, speaking of work with Mrs. Currie, there's a lady work with me, and she's a wonderful lady. And she said, Mrs. Currie said, none of by her girls, she meant none of the ladies that were waitresses and cooks at her place. She's girls in the sun too, but anyway, none of the ladies and waitresses worked at her place, took in drink or smoked or cursed. And the lady looked at her one day and said, what the hell am I doing here then? But the Gail was a wonderful cook and she loved Mrs. Currie. So Mrs. Currie in her personal life in Terence, I love courage. This lady has courage. Her and her husband, they had a tragic fire at their home and they lost, now it's before my time, it's 3 if not 4. One son survived, Charlie, and a great guy. He'd come in every year, he'd be planting a garden. He'd come in and he'd buy his cucumbers and fertilizer and stuff like that, seed potatoes, a great guy, and they started all over again. So we in life ever think we have problems or challenges, look at Corinne Currie in her 90s now, she keeps on going. They lost 3 of their 4 kids or 4 of their 5 kids. An awful tragedy. Somebody told me that no one loved him and has greatest respect for Mrs. Currie. She can remember when they had First Communion. All little girls were lined up with white dresses on. And the First Communion, St. Paul's Church in Harbushy. One son survived. He went on to adulthood and a great gardener, and he was, I think, an iron worker in the industrial trades. And he had a new family. And speaking of new family, there's one son in the new family, and he made me a lovely, I'm going to take it out of the bag. He made me a beautiful mailbox out of stone. He did a wonderful job. This here is just a prompt to remind me. This is a prompt of a lighthouse. So he made a beautiful mailbox, and it put his heart and soul in, and a roof on. It didn't leak anymore to get the mail wet, and all stone, and a door on it with a little magnet to shut it. So Mrs. Corinne Currie and her great business lady, a very resilient lady. And that's when I think of Corinne, Mrs. Currie, I think of courage, guts, determination, and resilience. And she's a mother and grandmother to many kids and grandkids. And I'm certain now, I don't know them that well, but I'm certain she has great-grandkids. So just a tremendous lady. And her husband, Terence, I got to speak in Terence, her late husband, Terence, come in the store, and Claudette was working with me. He'd come in the store, and he'd buy cabbage. Once we went to restaurant business, you always look for cabbage to make coleslaw. So he'd come and buy cabbage, and Claudette was just new. I said, who is that gentleman comes in? I get the cabbage, big cabbage from walking cooler. And he was whistling along, Terence, and he'd say, it's a great morning to be in love. He was just a remarkable man. You couldn't help but love Terence Currie, Currie, and he was from Glace Bay in beautiful Cape Breton Island. And one more point as I wrap up, I want to make Mrs. Currie. There's a show on PBS called The Midlife. It's a very popular show called The Midwife. The Midwife. And Mrs. Currie, before she was married, served as a midwife, and the Sherman family that were the founders and proprietors of the former red and white supermarket chain Industrial Cape Breton. They had a store in Port Oxford, who as well as Sydney, Glace Bay, and New Waterford. And she delivered some of the Shernan's babies. She was a remarkable lady, and that's how she was fortunate enough to meet her fine husband, Terence, and he come on up to the mainland Nova Scotia, became a first-generation Cape Breton. So you got to salute this lady. She's a wonderful lady, and if you're up there by the arcade, McDonald Nursing Home, drop in and say hello to her. She loves visitors, and they're a fine family. With that, I'm going to wrap this up at about 25 minutes before 3 o'clock this afternoon, on the afternoon of Friday, which is the 12th day of November. Thank you. All the best. God bless. And never let life get you down when you see the guts and courage of Mrs. Corinne Currie, very much with us, and her late husband passed on some years ago. The resilience and courage of those people is remarkable. Both of them. Thank you. Press the subscribe button. View and enjoy. Thank you.